Black on black crime, I would argue, is not really a thing. Why do I say that? Because we never say Latino on Latino crime. We never say white on white crime. The research strongly shows that people commit crimes in their communities and that white folks commit crimes at the same proportions and populations as black people. However, we have stories that have been modeled for decades that show black folks as thugs and criminals. And so it impregnates in the brain that black people are more dangerous.
But my components of healing, because of so much that's going on in our nation right now, and we all need to heal, is our friend in Washington, D.C., speaker, life strategist, best-selling author, and Mr. Positivity. Give it up for Michael McGill, Jr.
Well, thank you for the warm welcome. I really appreciate it.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm fortunate that I can't be there with you in studio. You know, I'm fatigued, but I'm also faith-filled. Seeing so many people come together while trying to find solutions is encouraging.
It is cool that people are talking about this, and mostly in a calm way to where we can reach understanding through conversation.
Yeah,
that's kind of encouraging, isn't it?
It is. But I challenge us in the same time, though, to be aware that we, while that is a good thing, we also don't want to monitor how people express their pain, because so often we look for trouble and we miss the tragedy that people are really voicing their concerns about. However, it is good that people are able to come together, like you said, in a rational way, but we don't want to miss the tragedy just focusing on the trouble, you know?
One of the things you wanted to talk about today was what's called implicit bias. Now, we're all biased to some degree. We all prejudge people to some degree based on different criteria. That doesn't make everyone a racist, though. What is implicit bias?
Yeah, so let's first look at some of the definitions. So we have racism, and racism is a combination of power and privilege. So as I said last week, not all white people are racist, but we know from the research all white folks can benefit from racism. Why? It's because black folks are 13.8% of the population. We are not the majority. Right. And I say this gracefully, and I know that some folks don't like to hear it, but whenever you are in the majority, you have privilege. It's not a micro, a personal thing. It's a macro systemic thing. And so racism is privilege plus power. But what I want to unpack about implicit bias is that we all have biases. Biases are shaped by our experiences, by what we've been taught, by what has been modeled for us. So if I can use my psychology and sociology brain just for a moment, when we think about implicit bias from a brain standpoint, there's a part of the brain that we call the amygdala. And the amygdala is right next to the brainstem, the animal brain. And it's also next to the limbic system that's all about the emotional regulation. And the amygdala is like, it's like a pad of paper, and it writes and it records. It writes and it records experiences. So when you have certain experiences or you see certain people depicted like stereotypes in television and in film and in media, you then can begin to believe these things are true. I'll give you a prime example of what I mean by that. The concept of black on black crime. We have to be able to tell the truth in order to fix the ills of this country. Black on black crime, I would argue, is not really a thing. Why do I say that? Because we never say Latino on Latino crime. We never say white on white crime. The research strongly shows that people commit crimes in their communities and that white folks commit crimes at the same proportions and populations as black people. However, we have stories that have been modeled for decades that show black folks as thugs and criminals. And so it impregnates in the brain that black people are more dangerous.
But Michael, if you look at, I'm not saying they are, and I'm not totally disagreeing with you, but there are people who look at statistics and data, and we're encouraged to do that in other areas. And does what you're saying agree with the statistics and data that you have seen?
Absolutely it does, because here's what people often counteract when they say, but Michael, there's a lot of crime in black communities. And I say, you're right. There is crime in black communities. But when we also look at the poverty, the fact that let me just give some history, for example. Black folks have been enslaved in this land for about 255 years. And there was about 103 years of Jim Crow. And then between 1933 and 1968, about 98% of home loans went to white people because of what we call redlining. And I'm sure Kansas City knows about that. And so when you see all these systems in place that have prevented black people from acquiring wealth. We had Tulsa, the bombing in Tulsa, where black folks owned, Black Wall Street, and it was bombed. When we see this experience and we keep people from attaining wealth, that causes to crime, which causes people to have more issues with healthcare disparities and the police. So there are systems in place that cause people to become more involved in crime, if you will. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense. It gives a reason.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I want to acknowledge, that so often we are busy treating the symptoms
Mm-hmm.
that we miss the illness. And so I'll give you a last example if I can. When we think about the history, it's critical that we unpack our history as a country, because we cannot fix and heal what we don't acknowledge and deal with. We must focus on the illness, not the symptoms. Like I said, I'll give you an example. The fact that if it were your child, Mark, who had an issue with drugs or with addiction, I'm sure you would want them to be able to receive some type of health care for that.
Exactly.
However, we know that earlier, when there was a crack cocaine epidemic, that Black folks were disproportionately put in jail. We had harsher mandatory minimums for the drugs that Black folks use versus the drugs that white folks use, when they were indeed the same drug. We had the fact that now that there's an opioid crisis that's impacting more affluent people, that now we're putting more money and we're calling it a public health crisis. However, there are still millions of Black people, hundreds of thousands of people in jail for weed and the intent to sell weed, even some life sentences, although people are now profiting off of weed today in states like Colorado. So there is no restorative justice for those people. So when we say these things, that's how systemic racism is. It's much bigger than just saying a nasty slur or calling someone the N-word. It's embedded in the systems and the fabric of this country. And in order to heal and in order to grow, we've got to unpack the systems and see what's happening, and also be mindful of the stories that you watch on television. Because if those stories continually show certain people of a certain demographic doing certain things, they will again impregnate that amygdala and have you believing that certain people are more dangerous, certain people are more thuggish, certain people are more criminalistic. So you've got to be able to lean in and do the unconscious or the conscious work of unpacking the unconscious brain. And that's where self-awareness comes from. Question yourself. Question who taught you what they taught you. Question why you believe what you believe. Self-awareness is one of the keys. In addition to policy change, self-awareness is one of the keys to fixing the broken system that we have. It's a cancer, and we've got to run to the wounded.
Michael, great job once again. Can't wait to our next conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you. Remember, we got to be able to deal in order to fix and heal, and be encouraged.
Deal to heal.
Yes.
I like it. See ya. Bye. For more information, you want to continue this conversation, connect with Michael on social media. Michael McGill Jr. You can also check out his website, McGillspeaks.com. Carly?
All right, at 9